Morning. If you got your Bibles, we're going to start in John chapter 10. If you want to be flipping over there and finding it, John chapter 10 is where we're going to start out. I want you to have a thought in your mind, and that thought or question is, what typically makes you unhappy? What are the things that, cause you stress or keep you up at night, or what are the things that really just cause you to not feel joy and not be happy in your life? What takes away your pleasure? What makes you unhappy? I was thinking about this last night, putting some finishing touches on it, and Alicia and I, we were sitting together, and I had Googled, because I wanted to have other options too. I Googled, why do people hate their lives? And she saw what I was Googling and thought, hey, is there something I need to talk about? We got issues here. No, but I wanted to know, why do people hate their lives? What makes people so unhappy? And I read through several articles, and you may be surprised, maybe not, maybe surprised to know that pretty much every article says the same thing. There's like a top 5 of reasons why people are so unhappy with their lives, why people hate their lives. Number 1 on that list is typically, well, you got a lot to be thankful for, but you just choose to be ungrateful. You minimize the blessings and you maximize the problems, and you don't focus on the good parts of your life, and so you just have all these things that you think you have to be unhappy about. Number 2 on the list is, a lot of folks, we compare ourselves with other people. And so we look at what others have, or what they show us that they have, and what we think about their lives, and we compare it to what we know about ours, and that causes us a lot of problems. And then there's kind of a threefold thing that comes in 3rd, 4th, and 5th place. They deal with relationships, they deal with jobs, and they deal with families. So there's kind of a top 5 that's pretty standard, it seems, based on a 10-minute Google search last night, of why people are unhappy and what makes people hate their lives. Maybe some of those are true with you. And maybe because we have this question on the screen here, what makes you unhappy, maybe there's something you're thinking of in your life that is causing you unhappiness right now and is stealing your joy and is causing you to really dislike your life, if not hate what's going on in your life right now. What makes you unhappy? If we're going to talk about going back to something better than normal, and this is the final sermon in that series, then we got to talk about going back to something that is better than just being unhappy with our lives all the time. That is the opposite of what Jesus came for. If you're in John chapter 10, you're in a passage about Jesus is the good shepherd, and how the sheep know the voice of the shepherd, and how the shepherd cares for the sheep. And what we're left with, especially in verse 10 in John chapter 10, is it is not supposed to be that way. If we are unhappy, miserable, ungrateful people, then that is not the kind of people that God wants us to be. Jesus says that there is a thief, in verse 10, who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he's talking about Satan himself. And so the point is that Satan comes to make us unhappy, to steal our joy, to kill our lives, to destroy whatever we're working towards and whatever is important to us. And of course, if that happens, then my joy is stolen, my life is wrecked, everything's destroyed in my life. Of course I'm going to be unhappy. But Jesus says, I came that you may have life, and have it, depending on your translation, to the full, or that you may have the abundant life, or in abundance life. And so what you're left with is that if we are unhappy and hating our lives and miserable all the time, it's not supposed to be that way. There's got to be something better than this. And so what makes you unhappy? What causes you all these problems? What stirs up the grief cycle in your life? It should not, on the surface level, should not be that way. So if normal is I'm unhappy all the time, I'm miserable all the time, I gripe about stuff all the time, let's do something better than that. And if that's going to be the case, we got to figure out what that is. I titled this sermon, Focus on Forever. If we're going to talk about how we can be happy and have joy in our lives, there has to be something about hope that comes into play here. Scott just talked about it. But let me begin this by telling you what I don't mean by focus on forever. All right, sometimes we get in this idea that Christianity is all about just enduring what we've got here and going through the motions of life, just putting in our 70, 80, 100 years while we're here until we get the pie in the sky, the eternal home somewhere else where everything is bliss and there's no heartache, tears, or unhappiness there. Well, part of that is true. But at the same time, we can't focus so much on heaven forever, eternal. We can't put our focus so much on there that, as C.S. Lewis wrote, we are of no earthly good here. Well, what do I mean? Well, let me explain a little bit. when you look at the life of Jesus, the perfect man who came and never messed up, never made a mistake, never committed a sin, sure, his focus was on the joy that was set before him. He had to endure things in this life, but he was looking forward to a reuniting with his Father in heaven, and then eventually a reuniting with all of us whenever we make it there. But he was not so focused on heaven and eternity that he forgot about things that are important in this world. He even told stories about how there are important things in our lives, and if we can't be so focused on the hereafter that we forget about the here and now. Like the Good Samaritan. He tells a story to say, this is what your life ought to look like. When there's somebody in need, when somebody's hurting, when somebody has come upon hard times in their lives, let's make an effort to help. Let's do something to help those folks out. Well, that's being useful in this life, motivated by the next one. Jesus would go around, and when he would see people who were blind, he didn't leave them that way. When they were deaf, he didn't leave them that way. When they were hungry, he didn't say, well, hey, this too shall pass. One day you got heaven to look forward to. He cured their blindness. He gave them sight. He gave them the ability to hear. He fed them. James, writing about those situations later, would say, look, we can't say that our faith is real and active and that we love God if we forget about loving the people around us. And so if we say we love our brother and he's in need and we have enough to provide and help and support, but we say just, well, go be warmed and filled. I'll pray for you. We're not really doing our job, right? So let's talk about focusing on forever, but let's not talk about focusing on eternity and heaven at the expense of doing what we are called to do in this life. All right, so how do we do this? How can we stop being unhappy if that's us? How can we not be miserable if that's normal? How can we go back to something better than just hating my life all the time? Well, 3 quick points, and then it's all yours. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, if you want to turn over there. Ingrained in these 2 verses, I think we're actually going to cover 3 of them here, but ingrained in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is this idea that Paul's writing to them about some hardships that they're facing, and he tells them the classic verse there is the pray without ceasing in verse 17. And so we should always be prayerful, sure. But if you go back to verse 16, Paul says, rejoice. That's easy. When I got something to rejoice about, whenever things are going well and things are great, then somebody says, hey, you ought to be happy. Of course I'm happy. Things are good. But Paul says, rejoice always. Well, that turns the table a little bit, right? Because sometimes we have a hard time finding something to rejoice about. But the command is to always be full of joy. Pray without ceasing. And then in verse 18, he says, give thanks, which is easy when I feel like I got something to be thankful about, right? Whenever, good things are happening, whenever we're prospering, whenever the family's just, driving along just right, when everything is good, of course, I got a lot to be thankful about. And so it's easy to be thankful during those times. But Paul doesn't say, give thanks when you feel like it, or give thanks when things are good. He says, give thanks in all circumstances. And so it's not really dependent on what's happening in my life. Because as Christians, at the very least, a base level is that we can find something to be happy about. Now, there may be a lot of things in life that we're unhappy about and a lot of struggles that we have. But it's pretty much incumbent upon us to rejoice in whatever situation we find ourselves in, to give thanks in whatever situation, whatever circumstance I find myself in, find something to be happy about. It's no coincidence that number 1 on my Google search last night of, hey, why do people hate their lives? Is because they focus on all the negatives and forget about all the positives that they have. And those articles are written from a purely secular focus. I got to tell you, man, if the world knows that, like if they can get this in their minds, surely we Christians who have far better expectations and far better prospects than the world without hope has, surely we can find something to be happy about. And so if normal was I hate my life, I'm always upset, I'm always just terrified of what's going to happen next, let's find something to be happy about. Second thing, all right, if we're going to go back to something better, I thought this was kind of catchy. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. It's okay. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 is where Paul says a bit about comparison. And we covered this in a sermon a few weeks back. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. But he says in 2 Corinthians 10, 12, we do not dare compare ourselves to other folks. Number 2 on my Google search, people are unhappy because they compare their lives with what they think they see in the lives of other people. Even though it's pretty well documented that on social media and when we want people to see what we are doing, we really give them our best foot forward and we show them our best sides. We never show the tears and the heartbreak and the messy rooms. So we always see the best in other people. And comparing ourselves, what we know about ourselves, to what we see about the best in other people is always going to set us up for failure. And so Paul says we don't dare compare ourselves with other folks. What we should do as Christians is compare ourselves with Jesus. When we look at his life and look at how he treated people and look at how he dealt with folks who were struggling in their lives and look at how he treated people who were mean to him, when we look at how he went through his life with a lot of struggles, with a lot of suffering, even with persecution, we look at him for a model and not the people around us. This is why there are so many scriptures and so many passages that point us to the idea that we are to grow up into the image of Jesus, not everybody else. That we are to be more and more in our lives conformed into the image of his son, Jesus, not conformed into the image of everybody else. That's why Paul writes that we're supposed to be not conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of our minds into something that looks more and more and more like Jesus. And so maybe for you, normal has been a lot of comparison. And you see the car that they drive, and you see the house that they live in, and you see how clean everything always is, and you see how, well their family seems to get along, and you see all these things, or you think you see all these things in the lives of other folks. Better than normal, in that case, is to say, I'm not really concerned about what other folks have got going for them or against them in their lives. I am concerned about what Jesus wants for us. All right, so comparison kills contentment. All right, third thing is at some point we should get to the point where we are focused on forever. Let's read this together. If you're back in Luke chapter 12, this is some of the words of Jesus. In fact, really the whole chapter in Luke chapter 12 is about this issue. Normal for a lot of folks is I am focused on the here and now. And what I see in front of me matters. And what is happening to me in this day and this hour, it is urgent, it feels urgent, and so I've got to tackle that before I really focus on what maybe matters the most. And so a lot of times we find ourselves in the situation, do I go after what really matters in life, or do I go after what seems to matter to me right now? Do I sacrifice, in other words, what matters most for what I think matters now? There's the issue. All right, so in Luke chapter 12, Jesus is telling a parable. Let's start at verse 13. When someone in the crowd says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to him, "Take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And that verse strikes a chord here. If we're going to talk about what matters, if we're going to talk about, what causes unhappiness in our lives, what keeps us from being satisfied, what keeps us from being happy and experiencing joy in our lives, let's be honest and say sometimes it probably is possessions. That I don't have what I think I deserve, that I'm entitled to maybe, or maybe that I don't have what other people have, and maybe even so far that I see what other people have and it sparks some jealousy or some envy, and I begin to hold a grudge against you. And you don't even know it. Like you had no clue that I was jealous or envious or holding a grudge, and it just wrecks the whole relationship because we sometimes think that life does consist of the abundance of our possessions. And Jesus says, no, could not be further from the truth. What matters in life is preparing for the other one. Now, along with that, that's the love of God, and along with that is the love of our neighbors. And so again, we can't be so focused on eternity that we're of no earthly good. But it should free us up, and it should motivate us to do some good with our lives. A focus on forever can free me up from being so attached to my possessions that I'm too greedy to help somebody who's in need. A focus on forever should remind me that I'm not so attached to this world that I can't sacrifice some things in this world to help people around me. to do good to my brothers and sisters, to do good to all who have a need, to help bear somebody else's burden. If I focus on forever, it doesn't mean that I don't care about this world. It means that I care about the next one, and that motivates my concern, my care for the people around me today. Studies are numerous. They're all out there. We're probably all familiar with them, that show that it's better to give than to receive. Those are the words of Jesus. But you know how it feels whenever you give to help somebody else. You know how it feels. It feels good whenever you sacrifice to do something good for somebody else. What if that we get whenever we focus on forever? So what makes you unhappy? Let's circle back. What is it that causes you the pain? What is it that steals your joy? Like the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. What steals your joy? What kills your happiness? What wrecks what you want to happen in your life? What makes you unhappy? Maybe we can help go back to something better by thinking about some of the things we've talked about. A focus on forever. To find something to be thankful for. To not compare what I've got with what everybody else has, but to compare my life with Jesus. Let's go back to something that's better than normal. Let's go back to a focus on forever that changes who I am today. Let's let it push us and motivate us to accomplish some kind of good in our world with the people around us, maybe even as a group of Christians here today. And so this morning, I don't know where it finds you. I don't know what normal was. I don't know what level of unhappiness you were experiencing in normal. But can we go back to something better than unhappy? Can we start living the abundant life that Jesus came to deliver to us, to give us, and encourages us to live? Can we find something to be happy about? Can we stop comparing ourselves to everybody else? Can we set our minds on things that are above, not just on things in this world? Maybe today you're not a Christian, and so this whole talk is kind of foreign to you a little bit. Because what is forever? What is eternity? Maybe those are questions that are rolling around in your mind, and if so, this morning, let's get some answers to those questions. Maybe today, a focus on forever for you means that you think individually about your life. Are you a Christian? Are you a child of God? Are you a part of the family of God? Are you someone who's being more and more conformed into the image of Jesus? So maybe today you respond in faith, repenting of sin, confessing Christ, and you're baptized, and your sins are washed away, the guilt is gone, and you can focus on forever. Maybe you're a Christian and you've been so for years, decades even. Maybe your focus has been on here and now and not then and there, and so you've been a kind of ungrateful Christian. Or maybe you've been a griping Christian, or somebody who complains a lot. Or maybe you've been somebody who's a Christian, supposed to be living the abundant life, but you've been living a pretty miserable existence. And so maybe in these next few minutes as we sing this invitation song, it's a time for you to reflect on that, to think about